New standards that work are essential, not new standards that you know won't work. I'm glad to be a co-sponsor of this amendment and urge my colleagues to join Senator Donnelly and I if we get a chance to vote on it as part of this bill. And I would notice the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Alexander.
Just a short time ago, senators finished the last vote of the week on a House-passed bill that allows the Energy Department to sell helium from the National Reserve. There are some changes to the bill, so it'll go back to the House. And at about 2 Eastern this afternoon, the House started work on the floor on the continuing resolution funding bill that would keep the federal government operating through mid-December. It would also defund the health care law, less than 2 weeks before the law's health insurance exchanges take effect. A procedural vote in the House is expected this afternoon, with a final passage vote tomorrow. A headline in CQ Roll Call says defunding would leave health care law intact and muddled, experts warn. The story goes on to say that House Republicans are moving to attach a permanent defunding of the health care law to the stopgap spending bill, which, if successful, would leave the law in a complicated and unclear situation. The story says that the federal funding affects how the government can enforce the law's many requirements, including imposing taxes. But even without the funding, numerous regulatory provisions would remain, including the requirement that most Americans purchase insurance and restrictions on insurance companies. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and other Senate Democrats held a briefing about the short-term spending bill.
Heads up.
Quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, I'm introducing today, along with my colleagues, Senator Whitehouse, Senator Begich, and Senator Shaheen, the Stop Tax Haven Abuse Act, legislation that is geared to stop the estimated $150 billion yearly drain on the U.S. Treasury caused by offshore tax abuses. Offshore tax abuses are not only undermining public confidence in our tax system, but widening the deficit and increasing the tax burden for the rest of American families and businesses. This bill eliminates incentives to send U.S. profits and jobs overseas. It combats offshore tax abuses. It raises revenues needed to fund our national security and essential domestic programs. Its provisions could be part of an alternative deficit reduction package to substitute for sequestration this year. But it should be adopted in any event because the loopholes that we would close serve no economic purpose other than tax avoidance. And that's not an economic purpose, as far as I'm concerned. And these loopholes shouldn't exist even if there were no deficit. We should close these loopholes on principle. They are blatantly unfair, and we should end them regardless of our deficit, regardless of whether sequestration is in effect. But surely, at a time when sequestration is harming families, national security, life-saving research, students and seniors, we should close these loopholes and dedicate the revenue to ending sequestration. The bill is supported by a wide array of small business, labor, and public interest groups, including the Financial Accountability and Corporate Transparency Coalition, so-called FACT Coalition, Americans for Tax Fairness, Tax Justice Network USA, Citizens for Tax Justice, the AFL-CIO, the SEIU, the American Sustainable Business Council, Business for Shared Prosperity, the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce, Friends of the Earth, New Rules for Global Finance, U.S. Public Interest Research Group, Global Financial Integrity, Jubilee USA Network, and Public Citizen. Frank Knapp, the President and CEO of the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce, explained his small business support for this bill this way. He said, quote, "Small businesses are the lifeblood of local communities. We pay our fair share of taxes, and we generate most of the new jobs. Why should we be subsidizing U.S. multinationals that use offshore tax havens to avoid paying taxes? Big corporations benefit immensely from all the advantages of being headquartered in our country. It's time to end tax haven abuse and level the playing field," close quote. The Stop Tax Haven Abuse Act is a product of the investigative work of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, which I chair. For more than 12 years, the subcommittee has conducted inquiries into offshore tax avoidance abuses, including the use of offshore corporations and trusts to hide assets and shift income abroad, the use of tax haven banks to set up secret accounts, and the use of U.S. bankers, lawyers, accountants, and other professionals to devise methods of taking advantage of tax loopholes that Congress hopefully never intended. Over the years, my subcommittee has learned a lot about these offshore tricks, and we have designed this bill to fight back by closing many of these tax loopholes and strengthening offshore tax enforcement. The 113th Congress is the 6th Congress in which I've introduced a comprehensive bill to combat offshore and tax shelter abuses. A number of provisions from past bills have made it into law, such as measures to curb abuse of foreign trusts, close offshore dividend tax loopholes, and strengthen penalties on tax shelter promoters. In recent years, Congress has made a little progress in the offshore tax battle. In 2010, we enacted into law the Economic Substance Doctrine, which up to then had been a judicially created policy. The law now authorizes courts to strike down phony business deals with no economic purpose other than to avoid the payment of a tax. Getting the Economic Substance Doctrine enacted was a victory many years in the making. In 2010, Congress enacted the Baucus-Rangel Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, or FACTA, which is designed to flush out hidden offshore bank accounts. Foreign banks have engaged in a massive lobbying effort to weaken its disclosure requirements, but most U.S. banks have had it, with foreign banks using secrecy to attract U.S. clients and want those foreign banks to have to meet the same disclosure requirements that U.S. banks do. Starting next year, foreign financial institutions will have to agree to comply with FACTA's disclosure requirements, which include disclosing to the IRS all accounts held by U.S. persons, or else begin incurring a 30% withholding tax on all investment income received from the United States. President Obama, who, when he was in the Senate, co-sponsored the 2005 and 2007 versions of the bill that we're introducing today, is a longtime opponent of offshore tax evasion. And just weeks ago, the G20 leaders declared international tax avoidance by multinational corporations to be a global concern and pledged to work cooperatively to end these abuses. The bottom line is that each of us has a legal and civil obligation to pay taxes, and most Americans fulfill that obligation. It's time to force the tax scofflaws, the tax dodgers, and the tax avoiders to do the same, and for us to take the steps needed to end their use of offshore tax havens. It's also time to recapture those unpaid taxes, to pay for critical government services, including to strengthen our education, health care, and defense, to help replace the absurd sequestration approach with an alternative balanced deficit reduction package that includes revenues as one component of a balanced deficit reduction package. The bill that we're introducing today is a stronger, more streamlined version of the Stop Tax Haven Abuse Act introduced in the last Congress. This enhanced version includes key provisions from the last bill that have not yet been enacted into law, several provisions implementing the President's budget recommendations, and new provisions to stop the offshore tax haven abuses featured in hearings held and bipartisan reports filed during the last Congress by my permanent subcommittee on investigations. I would ask unanimous consent now, Madam President, that the balance of my statement up to the conclusion be reported in the record as full at this point.
Without objection.
And now my conclusion. Madam President, offshore tax abuses eat at the fabric of society, not only by widening deficits and robbing health care, education, and other needed government services of resources, but also by undermining public trust, making law-abiding taxpayers feel like they are being taken advantage of when they pay their fair share. Tax law is complicated, and where most Americans see an inscrutable maze, too many profitable companies and wealthy individuals see an opportunity to avoid paying taxes. Our commitment to crack down on their tax avoidance schemes must be as strong as their determination to get away with ripping off Uncle Sam and moving their tax burden onto the backs of the rest of American taxpayers. Our nation is suffering greatly from the effects of sequestration, which were brought on by our failure to reach an agreement on a balanced mix of spending cuts and revenue increases. If we're serious about finding a solution to mindless sequestration cuts and our nation's repeated budget battles, we must look at the offshore tax avoidance abuses that rob our Treasury of the funds needed to pay our soldiers, to help the sick, to do research on diseases, to educate our students, and to invest in our future. Putting the burden of funding our government on the backs of hardworking American families and domestic businesses while letting a sophisticated minority of multinational corporations get away with these types of offshore gimmicks is grossly unfair. We can fight back against offshore tax abuses if we summon the political will. The Stop Tax Haven Abuse Act, which is the product of years of work, including hearings and reports of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, offers the tools needed to close the tax haven loopholes and to use the hundreds of billions of dollars which will come to our Treasury as part of a sensible, balanced deficit reduction substitute for the damaging irrationality of sequestration. Madam President, I also would ask that a summary of the bill be printed in the record following my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank the Chair, and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Vermont.
Madam President, first I would applaud the senior senator from Michigan for his persistence on this matter. He has brought the attention of the Senate to it time and time again, as well as the American public. Let us hope that he is listened to. He should be.
I thank my good friend.
Madam President, are we in morning business?
Yes, the Senate is in morning business.
Well, Madam President, as many of my current and even former staff can tell you, I'm fond of saying that I, like other senators, am merely a constitutional impediment to my staff. Well, I don't mind being just a constitutional impediment. Mine is one of the finest staffs on Capitol Hill. And tomorrow my office will say goodbye to Will Goodman, one of the finest. He's going to be leaving for a challenging new opportunity. Will joined my staff in January 2010 as a legislative fellow from the Office of the Secretary of Defense. We barely got him to his desk, and he had to jump right in both feet and hit the ground running. He was a valuable member of my legislative team, working on that year's debate over the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but also the ratification of the New START Treaty. Importantly, Will was a trusted staffer, a willing ear, and a source of support as the Vermont National Guard prepared to deploy for Afghanistan. And then when his fellowship ended, I was pleased when Will accepted my offer to become my senior defense advisor. In that role, he is instrumental in helping to pass the National Guard Empowerment Act. It's one of my longtime legislative priorities. Will has been a go-to aide for many members of their staff, too, and particularly to the more than 80 members of both parties of the Senate National Guard Caucus, which I'm proud to co-chair. But in our state of Vermont, I know that Vermonters have appreciated Will's steadfast commitment to our state and to the many veterans who live there, and to the Vermont National Guard, and to our state's economic development. He has always been eager to help and always been a fierce advocate for Vermonters. And after nearly 4 decades in the Senate, I've had dozens of staffers come and go. But we like to think they always remain part of what we call the Leahy family. Now, Will's own family is growing. He and his wife, Marisha, their wonderful son, Mark, await the arrival of their newest member early next year. Little Marcus, as we call him, will be the big brother. As his family grows, he's always going to be part of ours. So Marcel and I wish Will the best. Madam President, I yield the floor. And I see nobody else seeking recognition. I suggest he has no quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
No more votes are expected here in the Senate this week after senators approved a bill dealing with the National Helium Reserve by a vote of 97-2. The House today has been debating the rules for how several bills will come up on the House floor, including the continuing resolution that would keep the federal government operating through mid-December. And the House is voting on that rule for the continuing resolution right now. Another measure the House is working on is a nutrition assistance bill that would end food stamps for some 3.8 million people. The USA Today reports that some 47.6 million people, or nearly 15% of the population, get food stamps, with an average benefit of $133.19 per person each month. Here's what House Speaker John Boehner had to say what's happening on that side of the Capitol.
Morning, everyone. Tomorrow we'll pass a plan to protect the American people from the President's health care law while keeping the rest of government up and running. When it comes to the health care law, the debate in the House has been settled. I think our position is very clear. The law is a train wreck, and it's going to raise costs, it's destroying American jobs, and it must go. We'll deliver a big victory in the House tomorrow, then this fight will move over to the Senate, where it belongs. I expect my Senate colleagues to be up for the battle. And while that fight plays out, we engage in another set of challenges, the debt limit, and more importantly, the debt itself. And let me be very clear. Republicans have no interest in defaulting on our debt. None. We just want to find a way to pay it off. And that's why the House will act on a plan that will reduce the deficit and includes pro-growth economic reforms, including a delay of the President's health care law. Now, there's a common-sense principle here. If you're going to raise the debt ceiling, you should work to reduce the deficit and grow the economy at the same time. Now, the President's remarks notwithstanding, the White House may not get it, but frankly, the American people get it. Every major deficit reduction plan over the last 30 years has been tied to the debt limit. In 1985, President Reagan signed the Graham-Rubin-Hollings deficit reduction bill, which included an increase in the debt limit. When President Bush reached a budget deal with Democrats here in the Congress in 1990, it included an increase in the debt limit. President Clinton reached two similar agreements, both tied to the debt limit. And I would remind President Obama himself that in the summer of 2011, there was a major deficit reduction bill enacted with an increase in the debt limit. This time should be no different. In fact, I think it's more important than ever. A report this week from the Congressional Budget Office makes it clear that our debt is set to grow rapidly in the coming years if we take no action. That's why it's so troubling that the President's decided to just sit out this debate. He says he won't engage. Well, most presidents refer to their bipartisan efforts to reduce the deficit as achievements. The President sees this, quote, unquote, as extortion. So while the President is happy to negotiate with Vladimir Putin, he won't engage with the Congress on a plan that deals with the deficits that threaten our economy. Now, let me just be clear here. A debt limit increase without any reforms to lower our deficit just isn't going to cut it. Not when, under this President, the United States has racked up $6 trillion worth of additional debt. And you can see it right here. It's when the President took office. And look what's happened over these years. And look what happens out into the future if we don't do something about our spending problem. So a bill that does nothing to deal with the deficit is really telling the world that we're not willing to deal with our spending problem. The President needs to recognize that we've got a shared responsibility to govern. He can try to stay on the sidelines, but here in the House, we're going to lead.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday some comments came over from conservatives in the Senate that rattled many of your conservatives over here about what might happen when the bill goes next door. You say you expect your Senate colleagues will be up for the battle. Are you convinced now that the Ted Cruzes and the Mike Lees are both up for the battle next door?
Well, I'm not going to speculate on what the Senate's going to do or not do, but the fight here has been won. The fight over there is just beginning.
It's not really speculation, because he said the fight, they've already said the fight's over here, and they hope House Republicans can stand strong. So, I mean, what's your reaction to that? If they're...
I expect my Senate colleagues to do everything they can to defund this law, just like the House is going to do.
Mr. Speaker, if they don't do that, if they send it back to you...
They're not going to get into the ifs, ands, and buts and all that nonsense.
Do you believe that your members will allow you to go through with the vote with that stripped out, or will you need the cooperation of Leader Pelosi, and is it incumbent on the White House?
I'm not going to speculate on what the Senate will or will not do.
Mr. Speaker, do you expect to have that limit vote next week, and what are the must-have?
We're going to have a conversation with our colleagues tomorrow morning about how we would proceed on the debt limit, and after that conversation, we'll probably have more to say.
The Chamber of Commerce is saying the House Republicans don't do this. Senate Republicans are saying almost universally, don't do this. This is a losing strategy for Republicans. Is there any chance that you're going to change your mind?
To do what?
To tie funding the government to defunding Obamacare.
Listen, Obamacare is driving up the cost of health care. It's destroying millions of American jobs. It is a train wreck. It has to go. We've done everything humanly possible over the last 2.5 years to make our point, and we're going to continue to make our point.
Senate Republicans say they agree with that. They just don't think that this is the vehicle. They think Republicans are going to get blamed.
Well, guess what? The fight over here. We're going to win the fight over here. It's time for them to pick up the mantle and get the job done.
Speaker Boehner, in a recent interview with NBC News, the president of Iran said that they would not use their nuclear program for nuclear weapons ever. He struck a more moderate tone, as well as said he would deflected a question about the Holocaust, the denial, saying that he's a politician, not a historian. Do you have any comments about the recent words of the president of Iran?
Actions speak louder than words. And I think it's time for the Iranians to take actions to show the world that they're not interested in producing nuclear weapons.
How do you, on the debt limit, how do you expect these negotiations that you're calling for to proceed? You've told your colleagues earlier in the year that you didn't want to go back to the, shuttling over to the White House to negotiate.
Well, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that.
So how do you want them to proceed?
Well, the House is going to pass a bill. It'll be up to the Senate to pass a bill. I would guess the President would engage with the majority leader over there if he so desires. John.
Mr. Speaker, you said yesterday that the job of a leader is to listen. So who yesterday did you listen, or the last few days, were you listening to, and who do you think is running the Republican conference right now?
Listen, we've got a diverse caucus. Frankly, so do the Democrats have a very diverse caucus. The Republicans, by their very nature, are a bit more independent than our colleagues across the aisle. I've seen that from the day I got here. And so whenever we're trying to put together a plan, we've got 233 members, all of whom have their own plan. It's tough to get them on the same track. We got there. David, welcome.
When are you going to get around to doing the conference on the Farm Bill? And
as soon as we can.
And can you be more specific? And will you name, since Cantor got to write the nutrition title, are you going to put him on the conference?
I love those editorial comments that kind of come along with the questions. After we pass the nutrition bill today, we'll send it over to the Senate. And as I understand it, the Senate probably will have to reappoint conferees. When they ask for a conference, we'll appoint our conferees as well. And the sooner the better.
And will you expand the conference to include people on agriculture?
We'll see.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Are you willing to violate the House Dirt Rule to pass a CR?
We expect to have the votes tomorrow to pass the CR, and we'll take it from there.
But a subsequent vote? If it's needed?
I'm not going to speculate on what the Senate's going to do, not do, and where the votes are. It's way too early for that. We'll have plenty of time next weekend to discuss that.
Are we here Saturday, Mr. Speaker? Are you running on Saturday?
Don't make plans.
And the White House has promised to veto the temporary government spending bill that defunds the health care law. Associated Press writes that the official administration policy statement released today says that the GOP effort advances a narrow ideological agenda that threatens our economy and the interests of the middle class. Here's House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi in her briefing.
Good morning. Busy day, huh? Busy time. Seems we're always expressing our sadness. Our thoughts and prayers today remain with the families and loved ones of those killed and injured in the tragedy at the Navy Yard. Yesterday, we were joined by families from Newtown, from Aurora, from Chicago, and across the country who had lost children and siblings to gun violence. Whether at a military facility like the Navy Yard or wherever violence occurs in the country, our commitment remains the same. We must honor the memory of those lost, not just by moments of silence, but by using our time to pass legislation to reduce gun violence. We need more than that moment of silence. Tomorrow, the Republicans will hold their Tea Party continuing resolution. That Tea Party resolution is to shut down government, to double down on the Republican requester that will cost us 1 million jobs. This is a job killer by the end of 2014, and that's a conservative estimate. It could be 1.6 million jobs, and gut investments in education and research. To put American companies what's really interesting about it is it's a wolf in wolf's clothing. It's a terrible appropriations bill, the CR, but it is also a bill that puts insurance companies back in charge of medical decisions for America's families. This is a resolution that devastates health care in other ways, other than just defunding the Affordable Care Act and related to that. It effectively eliminates the strongly bipartisan children's health insurance program. You may recall that when that passed in the Senate in a bipartisan way, it was a veto-proof majority with a 70% cut in the CHIP program. It wreaks havoc by disrupting provider payments on Medicare, and it also, again, the Children's Health Program, and cuts billions of dollars from the National Institutes of Health. This is not a healthy thing for children or other living things. I call to your attention a letter from our ranking members, Mr. Waxman and Mr. Levin, about the impact on Medicare and SCHIP of this. Democrats have a responsible, balanced alternative authored by our ranking member, Mr. Van Hollen, whom you know very well, to reduce the deficit in a responsible way, to end the devastating across-the-board cuts of the sequester, and to instead make investments in the future and keep the government working, open and working for the American people. On the subject of the debt limit, it is my understanding that we will be voting on, something is being prepared for us to vote on next week. Shutting down the government is one bad thing. You shut it down, you open it up again. Not lifting the debt limit is unleashing a torrent, a river of no return. It is beyond cataclysmic. As if a government shutdown wasn't bad enough for the American people, the Republicans actually, I don't even like to use the word Republicans because this is a name that has been hijacked by a segment of the Republican Party, the Tea Party element in the Congress. Republicans are determined to hold the full faith and credit of the United States of America hostage to their radical agenda. Refusing to raise the debt limit poses a cataclysmic danger to the stability of our markets and the economic security of our middle class. But don't take that from me. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke said, a government shutdown, and perhaps even more so, a failure to raise the debt limit, could have very serious consequences for the financial markets and for the economy. And what does that mean to you? What does that mean to the average, everyday, wonderful American? Raising the interest, if we were to not lift the debt limit, last time just the conversation about it lowered our credit rating. But if we were not to lift the debt limit, it would have this impact on America's families. It would raise interest rates on your credit card, on your mortgage, on your car payment, on your student loan, and if you own a small business, on your business loan, for one. Two, jeopardizing the markets, as the chairman has mentioned, would impact your 401k account, your pensions and your retirement accounts. The impact on the markets would have a devastating effect on individuals' 401ks. In addition to raising interest costs for families and harming their 401ks, even the talk, as I say, of default in 2011 led to a downgrade which dramatically slowed economic growth, impacted the markets, and caused consumer confidence to plummet. Democrats support a clean increase in the debt limit to ensure America can pay its bills and prevent another debilitating crisis in our country. The votes are there. We will provide a huge number of votes for a clean lifting of the debt limit. It only takes some Republicans to do that. This is playing with fire. Legislative arsonists are at work when they start using the debt limit for their own agenda. Our country cannot afford another Republican-manufactured crisis, which this is. It's time for Republicans and Democrats to join together to put people to work to grow the economy, to strengthen the middle class. As we leave here, I'll go to the floor and we'll address what we're doing today, and that is reduce the funding for SNAP. Last week, I was in church in Houston, and the priest cautioned people there in his sermon. He said to be careful about praying in church on Sunday and not praying on other people during the week. And this is exactly what this legislation does. Its quarry are our children, our seniors, our returning vets, so many people affected by this cut in the SNAP program. On the floor, we have a Republican majority ready to do just what I said. In the debate today, we'll share the real faces of hunger in America, chief among them, again, our children, our seniors, our veterans, and their families. 1 in 5 kids struggles with hunger. Nearly half of SNAP recipients are children. Nearly 4 million Americans over the age of 60 rely on nutrition assistance. Nearly 3 million veterans and their families don't get enough to eat each month. This bill will jeopardize food aid for many of our vets and their families. It's time for Republicans to abandon this dangerous bill and work to enact a 5-year comprehensive farm bill. It's necessary for our farmers, it's necessary for our consumers, for food security, and for our, again, farmers and ranchers, and strengthens rural communities. 5-year farm bill, it shouldn't be this hard, and then to have as a path to the conference taking food out of the mouths of babies. This is remarkable. But it is a manifestation of the budget policies that I talked about earlier. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Yesterday at the event with the families, you
Yes.
called on the House to act on gun violence legislation. Would you like to see the Senate, which is controlled by Democrats, vote again on gun violence legislation before the end of the year, whether or not they're absolutely certain of having the votes?
Well, as you know full well, that the reason the bill did not pass in the Senate is because it required 60 votes. And while it had a majority of the Senate voting for it, it did not have the 60-vote margin. What I would like to see is for us to pass legislation, not to pass legislation. And again, as I said yesterday, we have no right to have a moment of silence unless we're going to spend our time trying to reach legislation that will reduce gun violence. It's in an agenda of things that we've tried to restore confidence in our economy by creating jobs and stop this foolishness of this talk of shutting down government and not lifting the debt ceiling. It's about who we are as a people, by and large, with respect for our Native American friends, a nation of immigrants. Let's pass comprehensive immigration reform. We've taken oath to protect and defend. Let's restore confidence in the safety of our neighborhoods, our schools, our communities by passing the background check legislation.
Let's see Democrats take another shot at the legislation in this Congress.
Well, I'd like the Senate to take another shot so that we can win on it. And I don't know what changes they can make, but certainly we believe that if the Senate bill that did not prevail for lack of 60 votes would come up in the House, that it would pass. That it would pass in the House of Representatives. So I think that the support is there. What more? I mean, 90% of the American people support background checks. How come that's not reflected in some way for this discrete bill to pass the Senate and the House? We're not giving up on this. We're not going away on it. And as you saw yesterday, we owe it to those families. But you know, so for such a long time, we've had the problem of violence in inner cities and the rest, and now we see Aurora movie theater, and we see a kindergarten in Connecticut and the rest. Everyone, your children, everyone is at risk. This is really as protected a facility as the Navy Yard, 12 people being killed by lone gunmen. We really have to act upon it. So many other factors are involved, but all of them come to a place where background checks would be the answer.
Mrs. Pelosi,
Yeah. Yeah.
The president of Iran recently said in an interview with NBC News that perhaps that they would not use they would not try to develop any nuclear weapons, that they would be open to opening up their country to more freedom of the internet, and the idea when he was asked about the Holocaust denial of Mr. Ahmadinejad, he sort of deflected that and said, well, I'm a politician, not a historian. It seemed to struck a moderate tone. Do you have any faith in the new president of Iran, that he could be a more able-bodied and willing partner to work with than Ahmadinejad? And what are your thoughts about his most recent comments?
Well, I hope that it's not just a public relations campaign, but is an accurate reflection of what their views are. We always want to see a diplomatic path. And I do think that, again, to salute the president for his courage to say we will not tolerate the use of chemical weapons and we will act upon that is a message to Iran, too. I think the conversations with the Russians about how to deal with chemical weapons in Syria would serve us well as far as Iran is concerned, in terms of something Tom Lantos advocated for years, which was to have the spent fuel, et cetera, under international, not only inspection, but custody. My daughter, as you may know, received one of those emails from when the bragging, usually I'm bragging about my grandchildren, when Christine responded to the foreign minister, not the president, the foreign minister put out a Rosh Hashanah message, happy Rosh, whatever the term is, greetings for Rosh Hashanah, and she said, interesting, sir, but how about stopping the denial of the Holocaust? To which he responded to her saying, that's not Iran, that's one person, and he's not here anymore, or words to that effect. So that was encouraging, and more encouraging, of course, the words coming from the president of the country. We'll see. We're all looking forward to a speech to the United Nations, to perhaps a meeting with the president. I don't know if that's a reality, but again, any engagement, any diplomatic efforts are welcome.
Last question.
We do too, because I really called on him before, but
Sorry.
Quickly, because we need the room for the speaker.
On the CR here, the bill has been written for the House at the 986 level. There have been rumblings.
988.
What, 986 after the rescore?
Oh, after the
It was 96. So Chuck Schumer said yesterday that they would try to get as high a number as they possibly could. If they strip out health care in the Senate and it comes back, can your side take it at 986, or does it have to be at 1058 or anything higher than 986?
We're not demanding 1058 or 1057, whatever the score is, but we do think that there's a compromise that can be reached. But I can't tell you what we will take until we see what the bill is. And the Democrats can supply votes if Democrats have a say in what the legislation is. So again, we'll be interested to see if the Senate is successful in stripping out I don't characterize it, Senator Reid already has very well, the attempt on the Republican side with the Affordable Care Act, restoring, putting your health decisions in the hands of the insurance companies. But if they strip that out, we'll see what they do after that and what can pass the Senate. But if they want Democratic votes in the House, our whip has been very, very forceful, and I think he speaks for our caucus almost across the board when he says we just cannot have that number, which is really $20 billion less, as you know. By January, it's $20 billion less, plus perpetuating sequester, and be something that we put our imprimatur on. But let's see what the bill is. We've suggested a splitting the difference. That didn't seem to work so far from our side, from the House side. But obviously, we always stand ready to try to work together to reach a solution to keep government open and to raise the debt limit because of what it means to households across America. And we'll see when it comes back. But right now, the mood is not favorable to a 986 number. Yes, sir, and that's it because...
That was my question, but let me ask you another one.
Oh.
No, I wasn't going to ask you about the CR, so let me ask you something else. With John
and I'll
Boehner,
decide whether we have one more question or not.
Oh,
okay,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry.
Yeah, no, go. That was passes for humor in certain circles.
You and other Democrats have suggested that Boehner just has lost control of his caucus. Could you explain the frustration, the difficulty of trying to make any deal with the Speaker, given the rebellious caucus he's got, and the fact that he doesn't seem to be often the perception that he's not in charge?
Well, let me say, I haven't said that he's lost control of his caucus. Maybe he's in full control of his caucus. I don't know if he's a reflection of his caucus or they're a reflection of him. But let's just say I wish the Speaker well. He's Speaker of the House. We have a responsibility. For example, the debt that has been incurred that we have to raise the limit to was incurred by the Congress of the United States. So we have a responsibility to lift the debt ceiling. And that's not for new spending. That's for spending that has already occurred. So I think that it's not just up to the Speaker, but the outside has to weigh in and say we understand the consequences of not lifting the debt ceiling, even if you don't. Let us explain that to you. Because that means in our household, increased car payment, credit card payments, student loans, mortgage payments, small business loans across the board. What that means to my 401, anybody out there with a 401k? It's very much in danger. So again, this has to be, I think, a national discussion because I'm not sure people know, again, the pyrotechnics that are going on by the Tea Party in the Republican caucus and what that means directly to them. So I wish the Speaker well. I respect the Speaker. I wish him well. And I hope it doesn't hurt him too much that I said I respected him. Thank you all. See you later. Bye-bye.
A headline in the Washington Times, Representative Steve Israel blames gridlock in Washington on a Republican civil war. Representative Israel is quoted in the story saying, "The problem with Washington right now is that the polarization is not Democrats versus Republicans, it's Republicans versus Republicans." Mr. Israel was speaking about House Speaker John Boehner's plan to vote on a continuing resolution that would also defund the health care law. As we wait for a senator to speak, here's an update on the federal spending bill with a Capitol Hill reporter.
Eric Wasson of The Hill. Why did House Republicans decide to go forward with this government funding bill, the continuing resolution that also includes the defunding of the health care law?
Well, the simple reason is they couldn't get 217 votes for a plan last week that Speaker Boehner and House Majority Leader Eric Cantor had put forward that would continue the government running for another 11 weeks while forcing the Senate to vote on defunding Obamacare. They couldn't get the votes for that, and so now they believe they have the votes, 217 votes, for a bill that would include the defunding of Obamacare inside the text of the CR. In other words, they were able to win over the very right wing of their party.
How about Democratic votes? What will that look like when it comes up for final passage Friday?
That's actually a pretty interesting question. There have been between 20 and 35 Democrats who have been willing to vote against Obamacare. The bill was not passed unanimously when it was first enacted in 2010, so there could be some defections, although there certainly will be a lot of pressure from Nancy Pelosi and Minority Whip Steny Hoyer to vote against this.
Well, then, assuming passage of the CR in the House on Friday, what's ahead in the Senate?
Well, there's a number of different procedural maneuvers that Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid can do. One of them would be is to bring up the House CR and to see if it can pass. It's assumed that it would fail, and then there would be an attempt to amend that. So there are different combinations, motions to table and motions to proceed on 60 and 50 vote thresholds. We'll have to see exactly what maneuver they do. But it will most likely fail in the Senate and be amended into some sort of clean CR keeping the government running.
Well, have we heard anything from House Republican leaders about what if the Senate strips out that defunding language and sends it back to the House after they're done with it?
You know, Speaker Boehner was pressed repeatedly on this in his press conference today, and he said he wouldn't speculate on what the Senate will do. The conservatives have been asked about this, and they said that, you know, NFL coaches don't plan out 3 or 4 plays ahead. So it seems like they're really not willing to engage in what's going to happen. One of the main things that could happen is that Speaker Boehner would have to bring up a clean CR and rely on Democratic votes. In that case, it'll be interesting to see if Democrats press for a much higher spending level.
Well, in addition to the language stripping the funding of the health care, there are concerns about spending levels in the continuing resolution. Why?
Well, this continuing resolution continues a sequester level of $986 billion a year on an annualized basis that's currently in effect. Now, the 2011 Budget Control Act calls for a lower level, $967 billion, and that's enforced by sequester, which would take the remaining $19 billion out of defense. So that's that sequester is a big problem for defense hawks in both parties. People in the Senate, including Senator Tom Coburn and Senator Jeff Flake, are calling for a CR to be at the lower level. On the other hand, Senate Democrats and many House Democrats, including Steny Hoyer, are calling for a much higher level, as much as $1.058 trillion dollars a year. So that's why the level remains controversial.
The President has expressed the indication that anyway that they will veto the Republican bill, the House Republican bill. So what happens if that bill makes it to his desk? Will the government shut down?
Well, yes, that would be what would happen, but it's unlikely he'll ever actually have to use the veto pen, since the Senate is unlikely to ever pass this bill.
Well, looking ahead into next week, Eric Cantor has also said that he will unveil a bill that will dealing with the debt limit, the debt ceiling, that will also include defunding language for the health care law. What's ahead there?
Well, there's going to be a meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. of the whole House Republican Conference where they'll work to finalize that debt ceiling approach. What Cantor's already indicated, the approval of the Keystone XL pipeline from Canada to the Gulf Coast will be included in some sort of instructions on tax reform, likely mirroring what the House passed last year with a 25% top rate instead of the 39.5% 6.6% top rate that individuals face today, as well as a delay in the terms of Obamacare, as it's called, the Affordable Care Act. The exact language and whether there be additional spending cuts has not quite been determined, and that's to be known after tomorrow's all-conference meeting at 9 a.m.
Eric Wasson covers Congress for The Hill. You can read his reporting at thehill.com and follow his reporting on Twitter at @ELWasson. Thanks for the update.
Thanks so much.
A little while ago, the House passed the rule that sets the guidelines for how the continuing resolution will be debated on the House floor. That resolution would fund the federal government through mid-December and defunds the health care law. General debate on that funding bill is expected tomorrow in the House. Here's Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and other Senate Democrats on that spending bill.
Everything around here is done by example, as you know, and Schumer was late last week, now Durbin's late. I can't believe this. You know, there are some who say probably we don't need to be here because my Republican colleagues have been doing a great job of explaining the House plan. For example, Senator Burr has said, dumbest idea I've ever heard. He said that a week or two ago. Yesterday he reconfirmed that. I don't know if this is a direct quote. I just gave you his direct quote. There was a tweet came from Senator Corker today that said, I may not be a graduate of Princeton or Harvard, but I can count, and I know that we're being headed into a box canyon with no way out. So in case there's any shredded doubt in the minds of our House counterparts, I want to be absolutely crystal clear. Any bill that defunds Obamacare is dead, dead. It's a waste of time, as I said before. In fact, I told the Speaker that last week. I'm disappointed that he's decided, from what I've heard, that he's going to move forward with a full knowledge that it's a futile effort. They're simply postponing the inevitable choice they must face. Pass a clean bill to fund the government or shut it down. The writing on the wall is clear for anyone with eyes to see that they can see. House Republicans' pointless political games are wasting time. We've wasted more than a week trying to get to a bill that is Jeanne Shaheen and Rob Portman say is important, and I believe it is, doing something about energy. These are not just games to middle-class America. While Republicans in Washington use these stunts to raise money and grab headlines, people in Nevada and around the country are going to feel the real pain of this economic shutdown. The consequences of a shutdown are deadly serious. In fact, the Chamber of Commerce is not usually a forward-leaning organization, and that's an understatement. Yesterday issued a letter that said, among other things, that Republicans should step back from the brink, that they shouldn't even consider closing down the government with a CR or, in fact, in fact, the debt ceiling. Should just forget about it, trying to tie this to Obamacare. And they have pointed out in that letter how disastrous it would be for our country. They're really putting the nation's economic recovery at risk to make an ideological point. So I'm glad to see more and more Republican colleagues speak out against the vocal minority within their ranks. Now remember, the people speaking out against the absurdity of the Republicans' plan in the House are not just Tea Party advocates. There's people who feel that it's just wrong what they're trying to do, and I agree with them. Only time will tell if common sense will prevail. Senator Schumer?
Thank you, Harry. I've been in Washington for over 30 years. In all the years I've been in the House and Senate, I've never seen a group of people more extreme than the hard-right Republicans in the House right now. Now, there have always been extreme members of Congress, but they've been gadflies who come and go without much of an impact. This group of extreme Republicans in the House isn't just having an impact. They've been handed the keys to the Republican Party by a reluctant leadership. They have banded together and literally handcuffed Republican leadership. So they're forced to pursue an extreme agenda that defunds or delays Obamacare. And their my way or the highway approach has carried the day. In this case, the highway leads over a cliff to a shutdown or a default, either of which would be devastating for the economy. Republican leadership has been dragged kicking and screaming into a fight that they know is bad for their party and bad for their country. And they should know it's a fight they will not win. And the whole country has been dragged closer to a government shutdown and perilously close to a default on the national debt. But it doesn't have to be this way. The fact is the hard right doesn't have the numbers to run the show on their own. But it's a refusal by the House leadership to stand up to them that's opened the door to the gridlock and potential economic disaster. Now, when you look at the body language and the faces of Speaker Boehner and Leader Cantor, you know they know what they're doing is wrong for the country and for their politics. And so if enough mainstream Republicans will come together with Democrats, we can make the hard right irrelevant. Democrats want it, the White House wants it, and in their heart of hearts, the Republican leadership wants it too. As these fiscal deadlines approach, we Democrats are standing strong, we're standing together, and we're sending a strong message to the House. We will not blink. Don't get it into your heads that we will. We won't. Don't make it part of your strategy that eventually we'll cave. We won't. We're unified. We're together. You're not. Their law and not negotiate one iota when it comes to the debt ceiling. This country, as we get closer to the deadlines, is going to come to the realization how bad default and not funding the government is, and Speaker Boehner will end up doing the right thing sooner or later. It would be better for him, his party, his country, if he did it sooner.
Well, right now, House Republicans are hard at work, mocking Senate Republicans on Twitter and double daring them to fight for their bill to shut down the government. They are so consumed by their internal divisions that they have no idea how this looks to families across our country. People are watching the news at night, and they cannot believe that our country is cruising towards another completely avoidable, absolutely unnecessary crisis. They are sick and tired of political games. They do not understand why we are coming up on another government shutdown, and instead of working with us to avoid this, Republicans are actively pushing us closer. Why instead of passing a clean spending bill to keep the government open while we negotiate a sequester replacement, over there they're pandering to the Tea Party and wasting time with efforts that have no chance of passage. And why 6 months after the Senate passed a budget that they asked us to do, and we did, and less than a few weeks before the absolute deadline, Republicans still refuse to join us at the table and are instead lurching to their right instead of meeting us at the middle. As Senator Reid has said, even the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which doesn't often side with us on fiscal issues, is getting very nervous that Republicans have dug themselves into a hole that will end up hurting businesses and our economy. They sent a letter yesterday to members of Congress urging them not to shut the government down, not to fight over Obamacare now, and not to play games with the debt limit. I think this kind of pressure is going to continue. I hope Speaker Boehner takes it to heart, because Democrats could not be clearer. We are not going to delay or defund health care reform, and we're not going to play games with the debt limit. We stand ready and willing to work with Republicans on a clean CR to keep our government open while we continue those critical budget negotiations. And I absolutely want to work with anyone who's interested in a long-term budget deal that puts jobs in the economy first, tackles our debt and deficit responsibly, and is fair to the middle class. That's what the American people are expecting. It's what they want to hear. It's what they want to do. It's what we're fighting for. I can only hope that at some point very soon, Speaker Boehner will bow to the inevitable, ditch the Tea Party, and get to work with Democrats and the many Republicans who are just as frustrated as we are today. And for the sake of our economy and our families across the country, I hope that point comes before we fall into the crisis the Tea Party is actively pushing us towards.
Senator Reid?
Yes.
Is there a way for you to just strip out the Obamacare provision when the bill gets to the Senate?
Let's wait and see what they send us. It's a moving target over there. We've heard all kinds of rumors that they don't have the votes, that they're going to try to come up with another strategy. So let's just wait and see what they come up with. And my two co-leaders here have made it extremely, absolutely clear. Obamacare will not be touched with anything they're doing.
Are you prepared to endure the public backlash of a shutdown in order to protect the health care law? Have you thought through what that would be like?
Yes.
And what would it be like? Senator Reid, if you look at the recent history of the debt limit, the only time Republicans ever filibustered one was when when you had 60 votes and they could squeeze you, but they knew they'd go forward. Do you think that if you put a clean debt limit bill on the floor that you would eventually see the Republicans crack and supply the votes to pass it?
Right now, I am focused on the CR. The debt ceiling, as we know, doesn't become operative until sometime in the middle part of October, maybe later in October. And so we're going to see what we need to do to get the government functioning past the end of the fiscal year, and then we'll worry about the debt ceiling when that time comes.
Senator, procedurally at some point, it appears you will need at least some Republicans to give you cloture on the CR. How confident are you that you can get at least 6 Republicans to join you?
My concern is whether the Republicans are going to be going pell-mell to support what the Republicans have done, or will do in the House, is what I should say. If they decide to do that, then they're closing the government, clearly. And I think that with all that Senator Murray has said, what Senator Schumer has said, what I've said, there's really some wrangling among the ranks, not only among the Republicans in the House, but now we've got battles going between the Republicans in the House and the Republicans in the Senate. So let's just wait and see if they have a stomach for closing the government.
Senator
Yes.
Schumer, let me ask you a question. Earlier this year, you've worked with some Republicans, Senator McCain and others, on various issues. Is this an issue do you believe you can work or will have to work with them to get those 6 or more votes, as Ted mentioned, for cloture?
Well, look, I do think there's a widespread view among the Republican mainstream that this is a dumb strategy. Many of them, have voiced that to me. But we'll have to wait and see what happens. The hard right has a huge amount of weight in the Republican Party, in the House, but also in the Senate. And it's up in the air right now.
You've not heard from Senator McConnell, Leader McConnell, on any of this?
That's Harry.
Yes.
Given the recent history on debt limit, Obama negotiated with Senate Democrats Kent Conrad in 2009 on debt ceiling, then Republicans in 2011. He negotiated then on fiscal cliff, and then McConnell in December 2010 on taxes. Why should Republicans believe you now when you say you won't negotiate?
Well, the President's made very, very clear, and we have followed that up by saying we also are not going to negotiate on the debt ceiling, and we're not going to, and that's very, very clear. We can nitpick what happened on the fiscal cliff as to how it came about. It came about. It was, at the time, it was the right thing for the country, and I'm glad we did it. We'll just have to wait and see what happens with Republicans. The ball is in their court. They don't have to, they should have no wind behind their backs that Obama's going to change, because he's not going to. He's got a country to worry about.
Senator Reid, I ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President.